here. So partnering with implementation and adoption leads. So right away, that you might be asking yourself, where does this come from, Joey? Well, just some level setting on nomenclature. Let's start with that. When we think of, and I'm going to get into this, but when we think of onboarding at Proteus or the product Engage, I want to be super clear. When we say onboarding to us, there's always two pieces or components of onboarding. One is implementation, and the other one is adoption. Okay. And so just being straight up, when I'll continue to say onboarding throughout this presentation, but when I'm saying onboarding, I'm actually talking about two distinct experiences of onboarding, typically for technology companies, even hardware companies, professional services companies. It frequently boils down to implementation, and obviously adoption. And so then when I keep referring to two stakeholders, that's what I'm talking about, because each one of those is an independent experience, not really independent, but what I mean by that is they are two different challenges that you as an onboarding leader need to address and work against and measure against, because that's where the rubber hits the road. In many cases, either both are lukewarm, one is better than the other, but very rarely are both operating at full maximization, just kind of historically. So why is traditional onboarding failing? Well, some of that is exactly what I was just referring to. So we see, and I'm not saying this is you, I'll be careful here, but we see a lot of times clients when they come to us or when we're diagnosing and just helping friends of companies out, we see that they're over indexed basically on configuration and low indexed on the outcomes and outcomes, of course, to us in most cases, uh, is adoption, because you can configure the living heck out of something. Good for you, but unless anybody's using it, it's useless, right? And so we frequently see that, and then they are wondering why there's a lot of churn or they're not growing at the rate that they want to be. And so it's just inherently the devil in the details wasn't considered, or we're going to walk through probably why this happened. Also, some of the challenges why it's failing, of course, is kind of one size fits all onboarding paths. And this again is kind of related to implementation and, of course, adoption, right? And so those two sides, and I'm going to talk to this more. This is even bona fide, yeah, played out more when you have multiple industry segments. So if you're selling into healthcare, financial services, da 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 da, you have 10 different verticals, 3 different verticals, right? Within that, there's multiplier effect of other things that should be more bespoke, more targeted from an implementation and an adoption perspective. Makes sense? Again, onboarding includes implementation and adoption. Then when you layer on top of that industry verticals, other things, the multiplier effect starts to kick into place. And it can be complex. But what you're there for is the outcomes and winning, right? Um, Limited stakeholder alignment on the client side. That's obviously a big challenge. We're going to talk through that because both the implementation and the adoption come from the client side, um, and lots of other things. But the reason why, in general, a lot of traditional onboarding is failing, or if you want to look at it as why you're not getting the results you want, a lot of times they're going to live kind of in these areas. Okay, especially that last bucket, which we'll talk about because everybody wants to know about TTV. I always joke, if you're a SaaS company on here, do not consider going live a success. That's just a piece. That's actually really just implementation being done, zero onboarding, right? And so that's a psyche a lot of times, even when we're just at conferences, shows, helping people, consulting, whatever it is, of course, our clients, right? Understanding that ultimately getting the product live does not mean it's success. It's not, let's go have a beer. That's really, quite frankly, in many cases, only 40% of the work is done. the 60% of adoption, refinement, and success still needs to be worked against. So we're going to unpack this more. Obviously, it's a big challenge. Um, and so, kind of the reality, again, kind of framing, as you can probably tell, I'm kind of leading up to what the data tells us, what the clients and we see. And then, of course, what we always care about the most are what are the expectations of your clients, right? So you got this big challenge ahead of you of onboarding, which includes implementation and adoption and any kind of bespoke industrial play or other elements into that. But then also the expectations of B2B onboarding today is the highest it's ever been and will continue to get higher every day. What is the experience? What's the tone? Many of you, if you're in software, you're in a land and expand type of client environment, so it's highly risky. You need to have a win so that you can continue to have more wins. Um, it's very interesting when we talk with clients. This adoption speed is a competitive differentiator because ultimately you're wanting to get that client to time to value faster, and being able to repeatably do that across all of your industry verticals is pretty huge. HUGE. I will say the interesting thing too, when you're thinking about all of this, when I'm saying onboarding per industry. So again, just trying to keep it simple. Let's say it's hospitals, healthcare, and I'll make it up, manufacturing for you. Same product deployed into two ecosystems. It's okay. And we actually encourage most of our clients to be tracking your time to value and other metrics by each one of those industry verticals, because that's where you're going to get that consistency of measurement. Blending them all together can become very problematic because the industries themselves and the deployment schedules, and just a lot of things can affect that. So over time, what you're really looking at is making sure that you have clear implementation and adoption plans by those industry verticals, because by design, a lot of times internally they operate differently. It's just throwing that out there. It's not a one metric on your side, it's multiple things to help normalize and actually measure the commitment and success really well. Okay. So just I call those pro tips or just a nugget of knowledge as you're thinking through this. This slide is in 480 webinars I've done and videos, whatever. Ultimately, this one is just the environment. Again, I always like East-West medicine, Eastern-Western medicine, getting to the root problem. What is driving a lot of these challenges during your onboarding process? It's hurting a lot of cats, managing expectations successfully, and clearly communicating those things out. But the challenge is you have anywhere from 3 to 10 people on your team and 3 to 10 people on the client team. If you're hunting enterprise, the numbers gets into the 30s, or in deploying, you guys know. And so having an environment to bring everything together, manage expectations, complete visibility on that process, but also feel bespoke to their experiences is mission critical. Clearly we have a product that does that, but why we have that successful product is quite frankly because the environment just can't run amok, right? And so we help bring it together and execute what we're about to show you. When I say full life cycle of implementation and onboarding, we're kind of looking at it from this perspective. Some of you might have more, there's a lot more than just what's on the screen here, but for presentation purposes, this is kind of really how we think of it high level. I'm going to go through this in about 38 seconds, but we typically consider a sales handoff as a piece of that because a lot of failure happens there. We also help clients, and our tool does, with new client readiness scores to onboard, like prepping them for onboarding correctly, then onboarding kickoffs. Inside that, we're looking at kickoffs and mutual plans. We're also looking at pre-mortems, risk assessments of the deployment from both perspectives, implementation and onboarding, right? Again, so you can kind of see the thematic basically approach to everything. You got all your onboarding implementation activities, you got your launch, and then you're going to get into your post-launch adoptions, which is obviously we gangster use the term Tiger Team, which we stole from NASA and the Apollo missions, but basically Tiger Team of ensuring adoption and a basically a repeatable way to deploy your product or solution within the first 120 days. You never get a second chance to make a first impression. That first 120 is extremely important for you. So when we think about onboarding, it's the full life cycle here because each piece is critical to the next piece going well. And then, quite frankly, if you're in technology, this kind of loops because you post launch, you've done very well. They're seeing value. They're going to buy more modules. You go through the whole damn thing again, right? In a good way, right? So again, kind of laying out all the scenarios there. So let's break it down because this frequently isn't discussed. Um, and frequently, if you hear people talking about onboarding, they say, who's the internal champ? But like, remember in the sales process, if you do sales or a part of sales, sales is always looking for the internal champ, that person who's going to lead the sale and help drive the sale through the organization. It's the same exact thing here. The mindset has to be the same that when we're onboarding clients, there's really three roles, but today's webinar, we're really focusing on the primary two. Of course, you have an executive role, the person who cut the check. There's a whole other loop in factor for that. But to keep this ISO'd, we're really talking about the right stakeholders from an implementation perspective and again, an adoption perspective, right? And so they require typically in a lot of organizations, especially if you're selling into or onboarding into more larger complex organizations, these are typically two different people leading them. Sometimes it is one. We'll go through that also. But ultimately, it's establishing that clear relationship and responsibility of driving value in the organization, right? So implementation has to happen first, no matter what, before adoption can. But what you implement could be heavily driven more by the adoption people saying this is our largest or biggest bleeding point right now. So you might adjust your implementation plan to get value to the biggest bleeding point of the customer. I know that sounds like, wow, really? Clients, customers are doing that? Yeah, a lot because they're wanting to justify that time to value very, very quickly. So just keeping it simple, and I might be jumping ahead, but I'm kind of in the spirit of it right now. Is let's say you have three pieces of your product, but one of the biggest challenges in the organization primarily lies in one of these areas. By working with your implementation lead and the adoption lead, you might want to phase the deployment to put preference onto certain elements of those modules so that the ROI goes faster. We see this happening all the time. And this goes back to the one size fits all. This is how we do it. We're very, stuck in our way kind of methodology when clients, your new clients, are looking for agility, speed, show me some value because I want to believe in our partnership. The more I believe in it, the faster I believe in it, the better the outcomes will be, right? Kind of jumped ahead on a few concepts, but ultimately that's what we're talking about. We think of onboarding as a partnership. It's not just you telling them what to do and how to be successful. No, no, no. The customers don't know what they don't know, and you want to line them up for success. So it's very consultative. Okay. So again, partnering with the two folks. Now, if it's just one, then it's obviously easier. What? So what we know happens if this doesn't happen is catastrophic disaster. No, I mean that sounds too much. But I think everybody knows where we're going here. This is like going to the movies and watching Titanic. So ultimately, the spirit here is that when there's misalignment between the two types and or the businesses, obviously that's going to affect everything from success, value transfer, all the things. This is where churn lives. You can watch 100 videos of us and anything on the internet will talk to you. A successful onboarding heavily determines churn, heavily determines your ratios of churn. Churn lives in implementation and adoption, both areas. Poor product lineups, then poor adoption. Sometimes that can be correlated back to the poor implementation. So all sorts of things here to watch out for you, but understanding why it matters, because in many places, this is where stuff goes sideways. So the implementation lead defined kind of just helping you in because everybody's product on this call or service is different, but it typically floats in obviously the technical area. It can be in other areas, but ultimately the implementation is, there to kind of get the two worlds to somewhat work together, typically from a technical perspective. um, aligning technical resources on both sides. Obviously, you can read all of these things. That's typically in the world of implementation. Within itself, it can be extremely complex. We have lots of clients that have very complex implementations. Some of them are long, also 6 months plus. So, and involving a lot of different resources. So just implementation alone itself is a huge undertaking for a lot of clients. And so that's why we kind of take it very seriously. There's typically a leader, there's mutual plans, there's expectation management, all sorts of things to drive that down. And this is all done in kind of what we call a centralized workspace. So so typically that's going to be your implementation lead, right? The person who is kind of responsible for these types of things. Just sidebar kind of things here, because we do this a ton. It's very, very important. The failure points in implementation for a lot of our clients before they come to us is GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. The client is supplying bad stuff, misalignment, resources weren't planned at the beginning. Like we need engineering access from your company and that wasn't scheduled and planned out. All sorts of things. In the implementation side of it, we're very big on pre-mortems. A lot of our clients have extreme success trying to predict failure. So what that means is going in to the client on the implementation side and saying, if this is going to go hell in a handbasket in the next 6 weeks, where does that live? Um, yeah, ask those kinds of questions, and you'll start to see tons of resources on our site how that adopts and changes the mutual plans, the expectation management, etc. Lots of ways to identify. Whoopsie, my I got a 3-year-old and he's very big into Land Before Time right now. I don't know if anybody knows that, but it's like an old dinosaur kind of cartoon, and yeah, one of the dinosaurs always, when they have a problem or they do something wrong, they go a whoopsie. So if you were wondering where I came up with that as a 48-year-old New Yorker, that's 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 where that came from. So you get it. You get the point here. So implementation, make sure you're identifying that leader correctly. Adoption, think this is going to play in pretty easily. But who's responsible for people using your solution? Whether it's again hardware, software, professional services, all this all comes into play. Owns training and enablement. I didn't include in this slide, which I think is a best practice that everybody knows, but I'll say it out again, especially in complex ecosystems. Sometimes you'll do the full implementation and partial adoption, meaning a phase one, a test group. I don't want to call it a pilot. Pilot infers they're not going to move forward with you. It's just a phase one that you are testing and refining and making sure it's ready for prime time, right? And so it's those types of things that are very important with these adoption leads, and really, quite frankly, having frank conversations. What is the best way to market within their company? Because most likely their company has had failures before of onboarding certain things. And so unearthing, that's actually one of the questions we encourage people asking, like, can you tell us of a product you deployed and adopted successfully and the process to that? Some of you might have just fell off your chair. Like open conversation like that and mutually planning around that with mutual plans and learning from success and failures of them, very successful way of driving adoption. Long story short here is this person is really where your TTV is going to come from. Obviously, implementation has a good role in that, but the time to value, it really lies in the adoption side, because this is where the rubber starts to hit the road. Making sense, everybody? I hope it does. It's the little things here. And again, this is more just sharing with you proven strategies and what you can potentially tweak or create more visibility to in your current processes, to achieve this. Okay. So, excuse me. So, getting basically the person picked out on adoption. Now, for some, it could be one person fits all. That's typically a smaller organization sale, but you still plan these things, manage them, separately, because typically you're going to have different team members on the implementation. That's going to be technical, da 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 da. On the adoption, da 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 da. And so even if it is one person, the approach in general doesn't change as far as expectation management. You're just, when you're doing the kickoff calls, setting the expectations correctly, that there are basically two phases of your onboarding process. Hopefully that makes sense. And but you will still, because there'll probably be different people in the adoption phase, etc. One caveat to not caveat, it's really just a proof point to throw in there. Um, if so, if your implementation process is kind of long and just it is what it is, and you don't get to your adoption and yay moments kind of till a little bit later on. Um, a lot of clients inject a success moment or a kudo moment or a hell yeah moment. And what I mean by that is typically if it's taking longer, it's more money. It's like Biggie Smalls, more money, more problems kind of thing, right? So if your dollar amount's bigger, a lot of times the implementation is bigger. It just everybody knows. So if you think about that, you want to maintain spirit and velocity basically of all that. And so what typically we see is the implementation team and the adoption team working together, knowing it's not fully adopted, but once it's being kind of accepted by the adoption team, early group, even just the main stakeholder itself, is actually doing an executive team presentation to create an aha moment of the value that is about to come. Because that allows leadership to again reconfirm your picking you as a vendor. Two, it allows them to be part of tip of the spear so they know what's coming, so they're better educated in meetings that they're having, and just a lot of other things like that. It also is, if you ask me candidly, what's the biggest benefit of it? Uh, Team culture and spirit, that we're working on something important. Leadership cares about it. Leadership is excited about it, and we're on our way. And it's mostly culture. Okay. So just another kind of way to kind of, if it's the same person doing both, that is what it is. If it's two different people, you can leverage those two leaders within the group to drive that. Um, this is pretty straightforward. Some of this stuff is obviously highly dependent on your product, your service, whatever you're doing. Most importantly, I think the demarcation line is typically technical and then adoption side. But yeah, always about risk management. We kind of covered this already. Um, yeah, so on the adoption lead, for us, it's all about numbers, outcomes, and value. Like that's really what it's about on the adoption side. So just being very careful that you've established benchmarks, you've established ways to determine ROI, all of these things, because that is part of what we like to call the 120, which is the 120-day adoption cycle, which is a structured campaign to get adoption. And that's led by you, your team, and of course, the adoption leader within the organization. Um, Many of our clients who are like high technical companies, like super technical companies, we even do this process. It's called FDE, forward deployed engineering, which you actually have engineers helping with the adoption, because during adoption is where you find integration issues or workflow process steps or other things that could be omitted. And the faster you can kill those, the faster the adoption will grow. And so having what we call tiger teams or FDE teams to do that really transforms your speed to TTV, time to value. So when we're doing actual client launches, like new clients to engage in Proteus, we use an FDE model, and it helps dramatically with the adoption of, our new client and all of the onboarding people, because we're trying to find the problems, the little things that are annoying. Everything involves, typically all of your products or services have some sort of behavioral changes, so minimizing those and optimizing success. So it's a very important piece on the adoption lead side. How do we get the right numbers in place so we can demonstrate the value? downstream, but then also having the right team members involved, um, to drive that success. Same thing here, implementation and adoption. It's kind of bringing it all together. Um, we typically are doing separate, timelines, or you know what I mean, measurement metrics, not timelines per se, but measurement metrics to drive that ultimately. And again, if it's the person is the same role, it's no big issue. You're just working with them. But typically, when we're doing um, meetings or stuff, you're including if there are two, everybody obviously. Um, so common challenges that kind of come out of this. Well, it's your typical stuff, right? Conflicting priorities, but again, you're managing those through a lot of the techniques and product things that we do. Limited client resources, that's inherent. That's why doing the mutual plans, creating the visibility, getting information to stakeholders ahead of schedule, and managing all that. That's how you best attack that. Unclear ownership, again, this is the mutual plans, the shared spirit, shared enlightenment on everything. Of course, I just mentioned it, change resistance. That's either mental or behavioral. And so the adoption teams really need to listen. If it's all quiet on the Western Front, it's not going well. Um, Great onboarding and adoption should create visibility on challenges. And that's kind of a mindset that sometimes is hard for teams to want to. But if people aren't trying and running into challenges, that means they're not trying. It's just a reality. And so it's a real, real big part of this that's why everything communication wise, trusted relationships between the stakeholders to be able to talk about this. And depending on how your company is set up, sometimes this requires some tiger team initiatives or minor changes to how you kind of deploy that out. So again, things to think about. This is what I talked about. Of course, this all starts at the beginning, setting clear expectations, benchmarking the client type. Here's what to expect. Who owns implementation? Who owns adoption? Kind of really the formality of the process will move people to success. That alone. Email is not a onboarding tool. Excel is not an onboarding tool. Quite frankly, Jira, none of those are. Um, it's a communication and collaboration framework is what is really needed, clearly with mutual plans and milestones and expectation management driven into it. But ultimately, what we're doing is aligning all the different parties. But remember, 90% of the time, you're not around. It's just the client needing to navigate stuff on their own. And so by providing them those roadmaps, those plans, the mutual plans, etc., and teeing them up for success, they're able to provide the good fight for you and your team and your product. And so it is mutual. Like at the core, that's how we kind of look at everything because that's where success lives, is in that mutual. And again, I think I said this earlier, but so much of the value of your product or service is more about how to leverage it, the consultative approach of it, because there's probably 9 different ways to configure it during the implementation period. And there's probably 4 different ways of using it in the adoption period and making sure that you're teeing the client up best for success. You know how they say, like, I don't care what the client said, you just have to understand their goal and present back to them the best way of doing that. And I mean that with grace, but you know what I'm getting at. I'm sure many of you have had this experience, right? And it's the consultative model that brings the value to the client and the trust to deliver that. Okay. Metrics that matter at the end of the day, Puff the Magic Dragon. I always say proof is in the performance. Um, that's a proof is in the performance. Funny sidebar. So I think everybody kind of gets my style here, but proof is in the performance. That's the Shane Company. It's a jewelry store out of Utah. And when I was a child, my parents lived in northern Utah, Salt Lake, and just heard it on the radio a trillion times. And it was about the diamond itself. The proof is in the performance. Um, cut, clarity, whatever that is. I'm sure if there are some Diamond fans on, they'll let me know. But they always say proof in the performance, and so I use it all the time. Obviously, um, the strategies that we're putting here really do work. I mean, like ta-da, we don't do stuff that doesn't work. And so you got to measure those things. What is measured can be improved. And so the metrics really do matter in this. Completion times clearly of both the implementation time and the adoption time, right? TTV, of course. But many clients TTV is a, I don't want to call it fake, but it's a massaged TTV. User adoption rates, again, Tiger Team 120, that's 120 days when I say 120 there. Of course, yours can be 30, 60, 90, doesn't matter. And it might be on client size and stuff, but ultimately there's a small period of adoption that has to go right in order for the rest to happen. And if not, it goes to la la land and basically non-renewal. Early value milestones. I talked about that. If you have longer stuff, do a kudo moment with some celebration. But with the adoption lead, making sure you have a couple of milestones based on his or hers, basically metrics that they have, again, to create that momentum. And again, sharing that with leadership. Um, so much of this dramatically affects the revenue you will get from that client in the next 2.5 years. And it just, I don't, I don't want to sound like I just sometimes onboarding is in some organizations is kind of thrown together. Um, and everybody cares about getting them live when getting them live the wrong way fast is typically what happens, or not typically, I don't want to sound negative. A lot of missed opportunity in that, and dramatically affecting the bottom line of a growth company, especially if you're trying to really scale. Um, it it's I've done a ton of presentations. If you're interested, just look on our corporate side and calculators and everything to blow your mind about how direct onboarding affects the financial P&L of an organization. And so it's doing it right is going to win. And so yeah, I just yeah, just a sidebar. Just because when you live it, you do it, you know it, you've seen it 1,500 times in clients. It's just the difference is real. Um, yeah. So again, metrics matter. Hope you believe in those. And again, every great leader should kind of in essence hope for some bad metrics out the gate, which creates a tremendous amount of opportunity to move your entire team forward. People do want to be measured, misnomer in onboarding. They just need to be measured in a fair way, which again, processes we just talked about, plus maybe industry elements to that, because everybody wants to win. Nobody woke up today and said, I don't want to win. Everybody woke up today wanting to win. It's in everybody. Off track. The point here is obviously creating the right environment to give you the best chance of winning and driving that success. So key takeaways, implementation and adoption are distinct. I hope that came through. If there's one thing you got out of this today, hopefully it's that. And whoopsie by the dinosaur. Both roles are critical to success. Again, typically organizations are heavily bent towards the implementation side and not so much on the success side, sorry, on the adoption side. But again, you want good balance on everything. Tailored engagement, that's kind of more of the bespoke experience, of course, which affects everything we talked about. Alignment accelerates value. Again, doing it right might feel like it's going to take longer. Oh, I thought I had something in here. You know how much rework most of your competitors are having to do on client stuff? That's the other thing when I talk about doing it right and going fast, like TTV. And then yeah, the time to value, and they give you some number, or they're like, yeah, our clients are live in 60 days, and then what you find out is you're completely redoing them between day 61 and 72. Some of you are chuckling, I'll chuckle for you. But yeah, there's so much of that stuff, and that's what I mean about doing it right, doing it in partnership, managing those relationships and equipping them for success. The numbers you get are real, and and like impactful. um yeah, it's just a different way to look at stuff. And then of course, strong partnerships reduce churn 101, obviously. So again, I appreciate everybody's time. I think that's it on this one. Yeah, I appreciate everybody's time. One thing I do for many organizations or leaders like yourself is you just want to have conversations with your team about this stuff, like just coming up, just yeah. My Calendly is in here. I do it all the time. I have a kind of a presentation that I do for teams. You tell me where you want me to cover or what area you're looking to improve, and I help break that down with your team if you want to, or you can just talk to me. It's just something we do. It helps a lot of organizations. Um, I teach entrepreneurship, and I also teach a couple other classes around this stuff, and so I find educating people on this can help them move their teams rapidly forward. So, with that said, yeah, mega library of information on our corporate site. Good, bad, ugly is all there as far as everything I talked about. I will ship out the remainder of, sorry, this deck and these things, but I appreciate. Hopefully, there's a nugget or two of information here that you can package up and deploy with your team next week, as many of you are maybe calibrating for the new year. And yeah, look forward to talking with any of you if it makes sense. Again, chock load of resources at the website. We do these webinars all the time, hundreds of them. So yeah, hopefully some value. I appreciate everybody's time. Again, Joey Connect with Proteus and Proteus Engage. We'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks.